Hi, and welcome. Thank you for all of those who are able to join the live broadcast of tonight's presentation on using LinkedIn to power your job search. We had 150 registrants from the alumni community, so this is certainly a topic that is hitting home with many of our alumni, and we're so glad that you're here tonight. My name is Sarah Rawls, Executive Director of Regional Engagement and Volunteer Management at the Emory Alumni Association, and tonight's presentation is part of an ongoing digital learning program series sponsored by Advancement and Alumni Engagement at Emory. As our world is becoming increasingly digital, we are focusing efforts on bringing lifelong learning to a variety of digital platforms to meet the needs of our alumni, students, parents, and friends. So if you're interested in setting up a time to speak with me after this webinar is over, I'd be glad to hear about other resources and programs that you would find valuable during this season of uncertainty. Two pieces of housekeeping items to note before I turn it over to our presenters. This presentation is being recorded and it will be archived on our YouTube channel, which houses over 100 past webinars on career and industry insights. Everyone who registered will receive an email with any presentation materials and upcoming other digital events. Second, we will leave time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. Thanks to those of you who submitted questions in advance. The presenters did review those and have worked those into the presentation. And we hope that you'll send in more throughout the presentation, and we'll get to those in the remaining moments. So today we are incredibly grateful to be joined by Rob and Ben. Ben and I have actually known each other for quite some time and just thrilled that we were able to put together this presentation to talk about his own career search that happened just last year. And now he's colleagues with Rob at LinkedIn. Rob is a 2010 Goizueta BBA graduate from Miami, and now he's a key contributor to the go-to-market strategy for some of LinkedIn's largest enterprise customers and initiatives. Ben is a 2014 Emory College graduate and proud history major from Baltimore, Maryland. He currently works as a product marketing manager for LinkedIn Talent Insights, a labor market analytics product that helps organizations identify the talent they need. So Ben, I'll kick it over to you first. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Well, thank you for having us, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Really glad to be back in the Emory bubble, at least in a manner of speaking. And so this conversation tonight is really about how LinkedIn is both a tool to find the job you're looking for and also to be found by people who are looking to hire. And we figured that this content and these lessons would be particularly relevant now as folks are going through the greatest economic disruption of our lives, and hopefully for the rest of them, although who really knows. But on a lighter note, I figured I would kick off by asking Rob to introduce himself a little bit, talk a little bit about your professional journey, and maybe share sort of your favorite Emory memory, so to speak.
Sure. Thanks, Ben. And thanks to everyone who's spending some time with us today. It's great to see alumni and students join from all over the country. I'm Rob. I graduated from the business school in 2010 as an undergrad. And I think I'll start with the Emory story or memory. It's not a specific moment in time, but what I often find myself reflecting on is how thankful and supported I felt at the time by the careers team. So graduated in 2010, I was searching in the finance track for iBanking roles in 2009. And as some of you may remember, the market at that point in time was not that great either. So I remember senior year just fully pivoting into accounting and trying to load my 2 semesters with accounting courses, get to the right career fairs, the right points of contact. And you know, reflecting on it now, there's no way I would have gotten that done without, you know, Andrea Hershatter and her team at the time. So just a big shout out to them. In terms of career, it's been quite a journey. I don't know how many of you sort of feel this way, but I kind of felt going to college having this expectation by the time I finished, I would know what my career would be and where I'd be spending the next 30, 35 years, right? But it's not been the case. I thought I was good with numbers and that they made a lot of money in investment banking, and I was like, sure, let's do that. And as you just heard, that didn't work out. So after the pivot into accounting, I started with Deloitte, where I worked with numbers for a while, got my CPA, and then as the market improved, made my way into investment banking eventually. Worked with numbers for much longer hours there, learned a lot, and then finally I was fortunate enough to join a early stage venture group as an entry-level associate. And that's when I first started to see a little bit more of operations and some of the customer-facing activities, and realizing that I really liked that mix of sort of quant and qualitative. Eventually, I joined one of our portfolio companies, and most of the activities that I was doing ended up being product management or product marketing. And I realized I really fell in love with that kind of work. So if you fast forward, I joined a startup, another startup, where I got the official sort of PMM title. And then most recently joined LinkedIn just this past February, a few weeks before the shutdown. So feeling very fortunate. I'll just wrap that with, anyone who's finding themselves trying to change careers or unsure with what they want to do, don't worry about it. It always works out. You'll be able to switch. And if you have any questions, feel free to connect on LinkedIn.
I think the main takeaway from that shtick, Rob, is that you had much more certainty as a 21-year-old than I have now. So that's excellent. So I'm Ben. I graduated from the college in 2014. While you were thinking about whether to go into accounting or finance, I was writing my senior thesis on the foreign policy of the Confederacy in 1861, which I'm glad to say has served me super well in my professional journey. On a more serious note, I did what people who write theses like that do. After college, I went into politics, dabbled in a number of areas. First on the Hill, I worked briefly for Nancy Pelosi. Then I worked at a polling firm in New York City and as a researcher in Washington. And then ultimately as the executive director of a political action committee that worked with Uber and Lyft to get folks to the polls on election day to vote. And the sum of those experiences led me to business school because I wanted to learn how to run things and to manage and to lead things. And I also wanted to learn a little bit about what technology was all about. So I went to Darden at the University of Virginia. I got my MBA, graduated last year, and have been at LinkedIn since Labor Day. So this is my first real corporate experience, my first marketing experience, my first tech experience. And I would say I've lost a lot of hair over it, except I've grown a lot of hair the last few months. So have you all. So at any rate, we wanted to sort of walk you through a presentation that outlines sort of the three main sort of pillars of a successful LinkedIn strategy. The first is having the right mindset, which is a little less about business and a little bit more about sort of mentality going into a job search on LinkedIn. Then Rob is going to talk a little bit about how to prepare your profile to make sure that you get found by recruiters, and that not just recruiters, but people who are wanting to network with you have a positive impression and really walk away from your profile knowing exactly what you're about and what you're looking for. And then I'll close with sort of thinking about how to use LinkedIn as a networking tool. And this presentation will be interspersed with stories from our professional journeys that really illustrated the power of LinkedIn as a platform. Before we jump in, last item of housekeeping: we are here as Emory alumni. We speak freely as Emory first, but we are not wearing our LinkedIn hats on this call. Would you say? Yeah. Cool. So when we say the right mindset, what that means is that especially now in an era of such unbelievable uncertainty, your worry about the things that you can't control has the ability to be all-consuming. Another way to put that is to say no amount of anxiety is going to stop a pandemic or to stop a recession. So, you know, it's the idea that if you can be present and focus on the search itself and controlling all the things you can control and showing up in the ways you're going to show up, you're going to be more available emotionally and in terms of time to conduct the search you want to conduct. And then sort of the second inspiration is, that being said, do all you can do. And you know, the Mamba mentality is appropriate when thinking about, or Michael Scott, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. You have to sort of wake up every day in what can feel like a very sort of demoralizing, endless process, with the mentality of what you're going to do that day to advance the ball within your control. And sometimes those efforts are going to be disrupted by the things you can't control, but it's the idea of how do you show up and present in a way that's really going to advance the ball. Rob, anything you feel like adding here before I kick it to you to talk about sort of profile specifics?
Nothing else other than I really love the first quote. That really hits home for me. So I'm glad you threw that in there. As sort of more of a type A kind of person, it really resonates to say, you know, hey, chill a little bit. Not everything is in your control, and the reminder to focus on what you can. It allows you to do that better. So I love that first one.
Yeah. Cool. So over to you, Rob. Let's talk a little bit about sort of what makes a great LinkedIn profile, both in terms of, again, being found and then sort of the networking piece.
Sure. And I think to tee up these next two sections, I think it might make a lot of sense to take a step back and think about what LinkedIn does and how it helps its customers, and how or what recruiters are being asked to do in their jobs. So when we think about LinkedIn, most people think of the social network. They think of the professional network where you can do networking, you can meet others, you can learn about professional topics and that community. And that's absolutely at the core of what LinkedIn does and will always do. But what people don't realize is that the vast majority of LinkedIn's business is actually serving up software and services for employers and customers to help find the talent that they need at their organizations. And so everything that LinkedIn is doing is about helping promote efficiency for those recruiters as they try and do their jobs. And when you think about what a recruiter's job is, you know, most simply, they're trying to find the right fit for an open role as efficiently as possible. And there's really two ways that a recruiter goes about sort of sourcing the candidates for those roles. One is what we sort of call inbound, where those applicants come into them, whether that's through job boards, whether that's through referrals. And then the other is more of an outbound motion, where LinkedIn shines, where customers can tap this network of professionals and figure out who they should be reaching out to that they think might be a good fit for a role. And so we'll be each sort of covering one of those topics. In my case, I optimized my profile and it helped a LinkedIn recruiter find me. And then in Ben's case, he did some incredible networking and he's going to share how that helped him find his role. So in terms of the right profile, if you want to move to the next slide, Ben. I wanted to start by just quickly highlighting a couple of components that we'll be covering, and most of what I'll be talking about relates to today. So the first is really that top summary or about me section. The next is your experience and how you describe those experiences. And then the last is your skills and endorsements, which I would argue is perhaps the most important for this. And then next slide, Ben. So in this case, we're sort of in a cheeky way, sort of talking about this in terms of SEO. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, it's search engine optimization. And this is a practice that marketers take to improve the odds that their websites will show up in search engine results. And when you think about that outbound motion of recruiters sort of tapping that professional network, that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to find candidates based on criteria that they're looking for. And so it's, our job as candidates and owners of profiles to make ourselves more findable. And so that's what we're going to sort of focus on through these steps that are on the slide. The first is really making sure your profile is complete. The more that's in it, the more they're able to sort of curate and sift through, particularly in the sections that we just covered on the last slide. And the second is really about making sure that you embed as many of the appropriate keywords for those for your job search as possible. And I'm going to double click on this point, these first two, and sort of like lean in a little bit further. So now you're wondering, okay, I need to embed in my profile the right kinds of keywords that match up to the roles that I'm looking for. How do I go about doing that? Well, there's really two main sources. The first is the job postings themselves. So let's say you're going after product marketing. I want to look at as many product marketing roles as possible. Look at the job descriptions, look at the responsibilities, and start sort of like accumulating and writing down the core skill sets that those descriptions are looking for. For example, in this case, most product marketing roles are going to ask about sales enablement skills. They're going to ask about pricing and packaging. They're going to ask about positioning. They're going to ask about competitive analysis. So I start to know that like those are the keywords that I should have as skill sets. And then the second is go look at aspirational profiles, like those who are already at the company that you're looking at and the role that you're looking at, or competitive companies. Look at their profile. What skills and endorsements have they already been endorsed for, or have they listed? How do they describe their previous roles? How do they describe themselves? And so then now that you've got this collection of keywords, you want to try and embed them in the appropriate pieces of your profile. Why? When a recruiter conducts these searches, they're literally doing things like, show me all candidates in this geography with 6 out of the following 10 skills that I'm looking for. It will, when your profile shows up, it will highlight keywords throughout the whole profile of where these things are. So, I think it goes unsaid, we're not saying to embellish. You want to think through your previous experiences, which of those skills do you actually have, and be prepared to talk to them later on in an interview. But taking a tangible example like that summary section, one thing that I like to do is sort of have a more personal sort of like headliner that talks about what I love to do, why I like to do it. And then underneath that, I literally do a keyword sort of copy paste of my core competencies or core skills. And I make sure those match up to the job descriptions that I'm targeting. Same thing for your previous roles or your internships or experiences. Like make sure that key skills used or key competencies learned or key achievements, and that they're in that keyword sort of format, and you can embed those. And then finally, the skills and endorsements. Make sure you can ask previous colleagues, classmates to endorse those. And the complement to that is, what if you don't have those skills? There are ways that you can go about getting those, whether that's online classes, whether that's free workshops, whether that's LinkedIn Learning and there's courses. Try and find ways to kind of round out your skill set. So that's really the most important thing. You're optimizing your profile with these sort of keywords so that you show up more often in searches. The rest below this, 3, 4, and 5, these are best practices that I think are must-haves, and we can cover these a little bit more quickly. Looking for job opportunities is a setting that you can enable that notifies employers and recruiters looking at your profile that you're open to those roles, whether you're unemployed or you're currently employed. And for those of you that are currently employed, your current employer will never see that you have this enabled. Activity and engagement, recency of sort of like updating your profile, those are all things that sort of factor in. So you want to make sure you do the right amount of engagement with your content, with the network. And then last but not least, this is professional. So, make sure you pay attention to detail, you get the right punctuation, you're not having inappropriate sort of posts or images, things like that. And as I sort of conclude this section, before I pass it on to Ben, I'll sort of close the loop here. Let's say you do all of this work and you start to see results. You start to get more in-mails. You start to get more outreach from the recruiters. What do? LinkedIn's doing its absolute best to sort of eliminate sort of spam, but inevitably you're always going to get some like roles that may not be a right fit or those sorts of things. But my personal best practice, and Ben may have another opinion, is I try to respond to everything, even if it's not a role I'm interested in. And one way I may do that is, so-and-so, thank you so much for considering me for this role. It's not a right fit at this time, or it's not something that I'm interested in, but I would love to have a 5 to 10 minute conversation to introduce myself and better explain what I am looking for. So that way, as more roles come across that recruiter's desk, they can start to think of you. And if you build up sort of a collection of these contacts over time, the flow of roles that comes in is going to grow and grow and grow, and you now can get more selective about what you start applying to. So, as any questions sort of come up, feel free to paste that into chat, and we'll try and get into a little bit more detail. But I'll move on back to you, Ben.
Sure. Well, before we totally let you go, you got to tell the story of how you ended up at, why are we listening to you? How did this work out for you?
So it's a good point. I guess the proof's in the pudding, right, Ben? So I am currently employed by LinkedIn today. And in the last startup that I was at, I was starting to see that perhaps my time there was sort of ending or wasn't sort of a right fit at the time. And so I enabled that looking for job opportunities, and I took a fine comb review of my profile, doing those two strategies that I had kind of just talked about. I looked at colleagues in lookalike sort of postings or positions, excuse me. I looked at all those job descriptions, and I did a big refresh in my profile. And the before and after on that, in terms of the amount of in-mails that I received, was really night and day. And one of those in-mails was actually a LinkedIn recruiter using our own product to find me. And I think in a lot of situations, we don't actually know somebody at the companies that we're targeting to network with. So this was a great validation for me in terms of the work that I was doing. And got an interview through that. One thing led to another, and I got in just in time, I would say. So feeling very, very fortunate. But this is the route that worked for me. Also, very much love your story as well.
Yeah, well, it's a completely different story in that you actually had experience that people wanted, whereas I had to be pushy. But more on that later. So cool. So before I sort of get into that story about sort of how sort of LinkedIn really had made the difference in one particular instance, let me just say that as I go through this approach to networking through the LinkedIn platform, I am about to turn 28, and I have already gotten 4 jobs through this approach. I believe in it under the guise that you can network and talk your way into pretty much anything if you want it bad enough. And so LinkedIn is a tool that enables that, and that's something that, with enough practice and enough sort of Mamba mentality, folks can do. So there are sort of 5 steps to using LinkedIn for a search. I'm going to go through some in more detail than others. The first is that I recommend. It's also important that we did caveat that we are not here on behalf of LinkedIn. What I will say is one of the least appreciated benefits of subscribing to LinkedIn Premium as a product is that you get unlimited searches. So what does that mean? Actually, we'll get into that in a second. You use those searches to find the connections who you most compellingly relate to. And by relate to, I mean everything from I went to Emory with you, to I sang in choir with you, to I knew your brother's former roommate. Literally anything that would create a sense of rapport, you can dig out through those LinkedIn searches. And then there's a process where you can reach out to them through a message. I recommend not using email for that, but we'll get there. Connecting via email to solidify the relationship, and then doing it over and over and over and over again. So more detail coming now. So how do you find people you can relate to? It's through creative searching. So let's say I wanted to find a job, find out like LinkedIn's on my list. I want to figure out who I know at LinkedIn who I can talk to. So if I look up LinkedIn using just a regular search and I click on the employees, I can, if you look at the red square, I can select into employees. You look at the blue square and you can see, oh, I can filter by education. I can filter by language. I can sort of filter by people who work at LinkedIn that used to work at my old company. And you can sort of square that circle however you want. And then you have a list of folks who you might know who would be worth talking to. And so you want to balance the people who the people who are close to the role you're looking for, and who you have a viable connection with. So of this list, the most viable connection for me is Seema, who I actually know through work because she's close to my team and because she went to Emory. And we've actually talked about Emory in the office, and it's the first thing that Rob and I had connected on. And if Rob had called me before LinkedIn had reached out to him and wanted to talk to me about LinkedIn, like I would have taken that call. And it's just relying on the fundamental goodness of people and that instinct to form connections. This is where a lot of people sort of get into trouble and think to themselves, why this seems so pushy? Like, who is anyone to talk to me? And I think it goes back to sort of a fundamental philosophy of what business or work even is. I think there's this idea in the world that we're a bunch of just sort of greedy little individualists trying to do each other in and try to make all the money we can. And that's, I happen to disagree that I don't think that's what business is. That's not what commerce is. It's basically a bunch of people with a bunch of skills and talents and commonalities who want to create things together and share ideas. And if you use that, you can believe in your own inherent value to whatever company that hires you. In other words, there are core competencies and skills that you have more than 90% of other people. And if you believe strongly enough in your own story and your own reason for why your work is important, you will be able to reach out to these folks and convince them that you're worthy of their time and hiring you. And the converse is true, is to say you wouldn't want to miss out on the opportunity to work with a great person if you had ignored a chance to talk to them. Now, I'm not suggesting you talk to everyone, but within the scope of sort of your ability to reach out to folks who make a difference to you, they're going to want to reach out to you back. And paying it forward in that way is really important, not just sort of to find a job or to help others, but just sort of in being a good corporate citizen and being a good person, period. So anyway, this is how you use LinkedIn to do this. So then once you click, if I were to click on Seema's profile, I would click connect, and rather than sending an email, which is sort of a product that sort of seems very formal in a lot of ways, you drop them a note in the invitation. And this is a, and I'm sure we can share this deck afterwards, but this is some basic copy that you can include. I phrased it in terms of Darden. You could phrase it in terms of Emory, but it's basically like, hey, you're a person who has a similarity with me that knows something about a job that I want. Can I ask you for information? It's not get me a job. It's not tell me how I can get a job. It's very much to say, hey, I don't know if I'm interested in this thing, but you know, this is something I can be interested in. You want to talk about it as one competent person, one accomplished person, one human being to another. And 9 times out of 10, people will take that call. So anyway, that's how you do it. And then once you connect with them, they won't often respond to that. They'll just initiate the connection. You can click on the contact info section on the profile, and it'll bring up the email that's associated with their profile. Because as much as we would like as LinkedIn employees, most people don't actually check their LinkedIn messages. So it's better to sort of go offline and set up a time via email, type up a version of that introductory message and schedule a time to connect, and take it offline and you know, schedule the time and have the conversation. So this is where we get to another question, which is, should I post in the newsfeed? And for context on this, I'll tell my most recent LinkedIn story, which is actually kind of incredible. About a year ago, after I was graduating from business school, I had a product marketing offer at Uber. And I was really excited about it because it met the criteria for the jobs I was looking for. And after I graduated, I'd had the offer for several months. I got a phone call and telling me that my offer had in fact been rescinded because Uber was reorging their marketing department, and because of that reshuffling, they were freezing all of their offers. And that was really disappointing. And I really had to go back to the drawing board and think, well, what am I going to do? So that was on a Thursday. I took the weekend to drink some beer, and then on Monday, I wrote a post that was basically 5 sentences long, and it said, "Hi everyone. Due to some recent events, like my offer at Uber was rescinded, I was disappointed that happened. This is the job I'm looking for. If anyone knows anyone that's hiring, please reach out." And I attached a photo, a PDF of my resume, and that post got 300,000 impressions on LinkedIn. It's the closest I'll ever be to becoming a Kardashian, and all sorts of stories arose out of that. I had someone in broken English asking me if I wanted to lead a go-to-market strategy for a fintech, an Argentinian fintech trying to enter the Brazilian market. The only qualification I had to speak Portuguese and/or Spanish, neither of which I speak, although I was a course shy of a French minor at Emory. I came out for interviews in San Francisco, and I had a Bumble date, and my date said she recognized me from the internet, which usually isn't a good sign, but in this case it was. And the third story is I was interviewing for a job at a company, and the hiring manager told me that her husband had flagged my resume over the breakfast table, and she said, "Oh, I'm talking to that guy later today." And so the point is, the lessons from this is that, like, strangers, as I mentioned, people pay it forward, people do the right thing, and you should trust in people's goodwill, especially now when things are really tough. Another lesson is sort of understanding your own inherent worth to a company and not being afraid to put yourself out there and express that. Because I didn't set myself up, and this is so important for people who are graduating, because people who are graduating are often put in the mindset of, like, these companies are employing you by their own benevolence, and that you come into, like, I can do any function, I can do any job, just please hire me, and I'll promise I'll learn anything you teach me. And that doesn't help a company hire you. You put out your intent about what your skills are good at, and they'll respond in kind. The third is, as to Rob's point earlier, if you respond to everyone and treat them as agents in your search and you thank them for the information they provide, they're going to get bought in and they're going to go above and beyond in helping you find that job. And fourth, you never know what comes in. And so the lesson is that days after that post, I'm sure, I believe it was even the same recruiter who probably hired Rob, was getting tagged. She got tagged 6 times in my feed, along with some of our colleagues on the Talent Solutions PMM team were tagged in there. And so, 6 weeks later, I had a job. And so it really showed the power of the platform and really the power of humanity to help through this platform. So here's the post. Here's an example of sort of how to engage with someone who reaches out, who actually I wasn't interested in having a conversation with. An Emory person reaching out. Claire Mullins is a really good friend of mine from my graduating class. You see, like, thank you, Emory Goodwill, don't care about healthcare. Keep me posted. This kind of a post gets you some leads. It casts a net that's actually broader than you think. And you're going to get a lot of fintechs from Brazil who, if you don't speak the language. If you tag some stuff, the algorithm will pick it up. You keep it short, you keep it positive, you keep it upbeat, and just be yourself. I know that's the most overused advice and really is pretty meaningless, but just sort of bring your character that you would bring introducing yourself to someone on the street. If you bring that mentality to the internet, people will respond just as they would in person. A question that I often get based on this story is, how often should I post in the feed as a matter of daily life to get engagement? To what extent is LinkedIn the new Facebook? And to that, I would say LinkedIn posts aren't as viral as Facebook posts. So don't overdo it. And the second thing is, like, if it enhances people's perception of your competence, your skills, or why someone would hire you, it's definitely fair game to post. And because even if you annoy someone on the fringe of your newsfeed, they're not thinking about you as much as you're thinking about their annoyance. So don't post sort of like photos of you on vacation or like things for the express purpose of seeking the validation of others. If there's, the heuristic I use is if it provides information that solidifies someone else's perception of my professionalism, then that's fair game to post. So anyway, I've walked through the method I use to engage with connections on LinkedIn, and a really lucky story, frankly, of how this all worked out for me and how I ended up at LinkedIn. And hopefully some of that magic can rub off for those of you who have tenuous employment situations or have lost offers as a result of the downturn. People are out there and they want to help. So I'm going to shut up now. Rob, anything you would add, or any questions or things we should banter about before we turn it over to the general Q&A?
Nope, I had not heard that story from the source. So that was great to hear that.
Yeah. So maybe I can like take my second Kardashian moment and monetize it. Maybe we could Instagram my bad haircut. Maybe we can see, like, cut it off, new product line, some kind of thing. Anyway, I don't get any affirmation for my bad jokes because I can't hear anyone laughing. So I guess any questions that we can answer? I don't know how we should do this.
Well, I've got you covered, Ben. And don't worry, I was over here laughing at your jokes. So let's start off with where we are currently in our current environment. Does it change what you presented on at all?
I could take that one first, Ben. I think the short answer is no. These tactics are going to help you by and large in like any situation. I think what shifts in this environment is that mix of like volume on that inbound and outbound, right? There's going to be more applications. There's going to be more, attention to the job boards and more volume there. So I think, taking the time to make sure that you're updating your profile, you're continuing to do the networking is going to be more important than ever. And some of the, from my side, some of the tactics that I discussed about your profile, I would almost do the same thing and approach to your actual resumes. Because as we get into more technology, OCR search, the ability to kind of scan automatically resumes in those job boards, searching and kind of highlighting those keywords is also just as important.
The only thing I'll add to that is to say, to go back to the mentality set, like no amount of anxiety or sort of machinations are going to control the macroeconomic environment. And you don't know who you're competing against, and you don't know the hiring circumstances of a given company, and you don't know if you're interviewing, if it doesn't go well for something that's totally beyond your control. So your job is to make sure you're as prepared as possible to show up well. And that means practicing your interviews, it means getting your resume together, it means making sure your profile is complete, and to make sure, like a mantra that when I was working in DC and working in politics, Gordon Taylor, who's an Emory alum, gave me some excellent advice, which is to say, pretend that you network like you have ears in the walls. Like try to hear about jobs before they're even posted with that vigor and intensity, and trying to make connections and asking the right questions. So, focusing on what you can control and doing it really well is what's more important than ever, not worrying about the other stuff.
Great. Rob, you had mentioned resumes. I have quite a few questions that are about the experience section. How much detail should be put in there? Should it be identical to your resume or more concise?
That's a good question. I think the most impactful thing that I did on the resume, and I borrowed this from a very senior person, was more of an executive summary type section at the top. Because the chances that a recruiter will read through the fine details on a resume are starting to dwindle with all of these other sources around profiles and sources of information about someone. So at the top, what I structured was, kind of like a column with some of the core skill sets that I work on, and then like 3 headlines on, how I would promote myself. So that way, if someone had, just a couple of seconds to kind of glance at my resume, they knew it was worth taking the time to actually look at those more detailed sections. In terms of the mirroring them, it's not crucial to get them exact, but what you don't want is discrepancies. You don't want differences in the date ranges that you worked there. Errors or inconsistencies in the way that you describe what you worked on. Those types of things. I think you just want to avoid any of those like kind of clerical mistakes that start to erode credibility in your resume.
A follow-on observation from there, and a question I get a lot, is what about cover letters? And let me tell you something. One is the experience section is kind of a form for a cover letter, but more important, you should spend the marginal hour of your time networking to get a referral rather than fretting for hours over a cover letter. Let this conversation, especially for you undergrads, be the permission you need to not write cover letters.
Okay. Are there any LinkedIn tools that evaluate the strength of your current profile and its keywords?
Not that I know of.
No, not that I'm aware of either. I think what there is, however, is also courses on sort of LinkedIn Learning that talk through the strength and the strategy of building profiles and good best practices outside of the ones that I've spoken on. So I think you can sort of triage through those sources to what a solid and ideal profile might look like.
Great. Can you give any advice on leveraging LinkedIn when you're hoping to have a transition to a new functional area or a new industry?
I'll take this one.
Go
As the Emory history major. Early in your career, and this is advice that I got early on, is you have to focus on your verbs. Like what can you do? Do you write? Do you do data analysis? Do you give speeches? And changing industry is a means of anchoring on what skills you have. So for example, what I said to transition from politics into product marketing is that politicians are just bad products, and that voting is the same as a purchase decision. In other words, you're in a competitive environment, you're trying to convince someone of the benefits of your product against the shortcomings of another, and get people to make a decision based on which makes them qualitatively feel better. And if you can do that, then if you could do that, I can sell your software. And that, I use that line. If I used it once, I used it hundreds of times, and that works. In terms of, if you want to pivot, same function, different industry. Excuse me, same industry, different function. You anchor on the industry expertise. But I would say that's probably easier to do later in a career, where you have more time to get more industry expertise and people trust you to change function, rather than the functional expertise you get earlier. Rob, I don't know if you have a point of view on that.
No, that's pretty accurate. It's incredible how transferable your soft skills are in particular. Regardless of what role you're in, regardless of what function you're in or what industry you're in, like your behavioral skills and your soft skills are some of the first things I always look for in sort of interviews. And so, stay true to that. And to Ben's point, like kind of focus on what your sort of superpower is a term that sort of gets thrown out a lot, right? For me, switching from, corporate development into product marketing, I talked about sort of like the market analysis piece, right? That's an overlap between the two roles that's very, very strong. And so I highlighted that. And so it's just kind of, again, doing that research on the job descriptions, trying to find those overlaps in terms of skill sets, and then profiling the one that you're good at. And it's just remarkable how transferable they really are.
I want to, that's an excellent point, and I want to get specific on it for a second, which is to say that one is people can get really too specific on that. They say, like, what do you do? I do Excel. Excel is a tool. It is not an end. The other thing is they get too sort of like, I do business analysis. Fantastic. Everyone does that at some level. I think the way I would answer this question for yourself is, if I were to slide you $10,000 to do something right now and produce a result for me, what would it be, and why would it be better? And so the example for me is, my 90th percentile skill is understanding something that's complicated and explaining it to people in a simple way. And I know how to do that because of all my industry experience and because of my research background, to be able to empathize with people from product managers to voters, and turn that around and explain it because I didn't understand it before myself. And if you think about your skills that way, what would someone pay you to do? Examine them at that altitude. You're going to find a lot of people bite on that.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions about that informational interview, that kind of initial email out. I know you had said, ask the right questions. Can you give some examples of that? And then kind of at what point do you know how to move it from more of an informational interview to something, maybe more about talking about the job or asking about hiring?
Right. So it depends where you are in your search, right? So when I was in business school, my first networking phone calls were all about what is this industry? What do you do? Like, how did you decide between jobs? What are the different variables that are different in product marketing or business development or whatever? And by the right questions, you cue up that conversation as, I would like to learn a little bit more about your job. And you ask those questions and you take them away. For those of you who are more sort of down the road and have a more fully formed story, the impetus for talking to someone will often be a specific posting. But you have to go into that conversation knowing what someone can speak to. So for example, someone called me from Darden and wanted to talk to me about a PMM job with LinkedIn Learning, which is a different business unit. And LinkedIn is a huge company and I don't know anyone over there. So most people will be forthright and go, I don't know anyone over there, but I can talk to A, B, and C. But it's helpful to have knowledge of what information that person can provide, getting the most out of the scope of whatever that is, and then knowing what that person is capable of doing for you. So what does it mean capable of doing for you? That means that person can refer you, but if I referred to someone to LinkedIn Learning, it's not going to matter at all if I don't introduce them to the hiring manager, because it's like, oh, like somebody at LinkedIn wants to get their friend a job, so they refer. Like if you get someone to vouch for you and your skills and your interests to someone they personally know who is hiring for a role and puts their own reputation on the line for yours, that speaks a higher volume about your ability. So your goal is to get someone as close to that job to vouch for you. And you have to understand who you're talking to and their proximity from that goal and how you're going to ask the right questions to get the information you need from that person within the context of the conversation, and then push them towards making a connection that gets you closer to that ultimate objective. I'm sorry that's so abstract. Russ, do you have anything to add? Russ is my colleague at LinkedIn. I did the same event at Darden, so I'm habituated to doing that. Rob.
No, huge +1 to that. The proximity to the role is the goal. And if the first person that you're speaking to isn't that, your goal shifts towards trying to build that connection to that person. Who can you refer me to, for my next conversation? And there was one other topic in there that I wanted to tease out that I think is super important, that sort of guides your initial questions. It's just as important for you to sort of assess and snuff out whether this is the right role for you. This isn't a one-way interview or sort of conversation. Nothing is going to drive your career success more than sort of getting a right fit in both directions. So use that time and be okay with an outcome that is, this isn't the right job for me. That's okay too. So I just wanted to tease that out.
Right, and I think just to sort of twist that a little bit, because in tough economic times, people's wallets are squeezed and they need to get a job. And I think the way to phrase it in that case is just focus on the jobs, spend more time focusing on the jobs where you feel like you're the higher fit, develop a story that fits you into that role, and then tweak it to go a little bit either way, rather than trying to do, as a consultant would say, to boil the ocean and apply for everything. Like, just because you need the job doesn't mean you can't be selective around the opportunities that you're more likely to have success.
Great. And thinking about connections and messaging, how do you connect and build relationships with those recruiters?
That's a great question. I would focus on hiring managers more than recruiters. But to that end, because hiring managers they're making the decision. And if a hiring manager wants to put you through, even if you hypothetically bomb the interview with the recruiter, that you'll get through. But the great, and I had this experience with my the recruiter at LinkedIn. Rob, I don't know if you had this. Once you clear that recruiter bar, that recruiter's job, they are measured on time to hire and cost per hire. And those metrics go down if they can convert the candidates that they bless and send along, which means that it's in their interest to help you get a job. Abstract that, if have a good relationship with your recruiter, I won the LinkedIn recruiter over. I had actually interviewed with her for a job I didn't get before the Uber thing. She remembered me from that first conversation. We talked about it and new roles, and she's like, okay, these are 6 jobs you could go for. This is the one that sounds good for A, B, and C. Fantastic. She puts me through for that job. I called her for feedback between all the interview rounds. I asked, like, do you know this person? Like, what's their vibe? How should I approach it? And they will coach you through the rounds. So the hiring manager is the better hook to get into a company. But once you get over the gauntlet of the hiring screen, the recruiter is going to try to put you in the seat. Rob, I don't know if you have a similar or different view there.
Yeah, I'll just quickly touch on one point there, which is if you're the one doing proactive outreach, focus on the hiring managers, because the recruiter's job is to connect you to that person anyway. The optimizing your profile is going to work more for the recruiters trying to find you, and that's the point of connection there is a little bit more organic from their side. So you want to maintain and build those relationships there, even if it's not the right role. But if you're the one doing the search and spending some cycles doing that, I would try and focus on making connection with someone who works in that group already, identifying who the hiring manager might be, and focus time networking to that person as opposed to directly to the recruiter.
Great. Well, I think that's actually all that we have time for tonight. Thank you, Rob and Ben, for your really excellent webinar. I hope it moves our attendees forward in their careers. And we really want to thank all of our Emory community for attending. As a reminder, this webinar and a short survey will be sent in a follow-up email. And hey, remember, we have a very active Emory alumni LinkedIn group as well. So join that. And on behalf of the Emory Alumni Association, thanks for spending tonight with us, and we hope you have a great and safe rest of your week. Have a good night, everybody.
Feel free to add us too. We always could use a few friends.
Especially me.
Take care, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone.